He was not born into power, he was born into heat. In 1767, in the restless province of Gascony, Joachim Murat entered a world that did not promise greatness. His father kept an inn along dusty provincial roads. His mother expected obedience, discipline, reverence. The church offered structure. The sword offered danger. Gascony itself was a land of fierce pride and quick tempers, a place where reputation mattered more than coin, and where insult, unanswered, became inheritance. Murat absorbed this atmosphere before he could name it. Even as a boy, he carried himself with a certain voltage, as if the air around him were charged and waiting for release. For a time it seemed that voltage might be contained. He was sent toward priesthood. The cassock, not the cavalry coat, nearly claimed him. The church would have required submission. It would have required stillness. It would have required the extinguishing of visible ambition. But Murat was not a man made for extinguishing. While he studied scripture, France itself was unraveling. The revolution did not begin as a theory. It arrived as tremor and smoke. Thrones trembled, institutions cracked, old hierarchies faltered. For most, it was terror. For a young man without inheritance, it was invitation. Murat left the priesthood and entered the cavalry. Not cautiously, not humbly. He entered as though he had been waiting his entire life for the world to loosen its grip on order. The cavalry was not simply a military branch. It was the embodiment of motion. It demanded instinct over calculation. It rewarded speed over hesitation, and it punished the timid without mercy. Murat did not merely fit into that world, he expanded inside it. He rode as if forward momentum itself were destiny. There are moments in history when two rising forces collide and reshape one another. Murat's moment came in October of 1795. Paris stood on the brink of insurrection. Royalist forces gathered with the intent to crush the fragile revolutionary government. A young artillery officer named Napoleon Bonaparte was tasked with defending it. He required cannons immediately before the city's balance tipped beyond recovery. The route to retrieve them ran through uncertainty and potential violence. Murat volunteered. It was not bravado alone. It was instinct. Where other men saw risk, Murat saw acceleration. Where others hesitated, calculating consequences, Murat moved. He rode hard. He returned with the artillery. The guns would secure Napoleon's defense of Paris, and Napoleon would not forget the man who moved when others froze. From that day forward, Murat was no longer a nameless officer. He had demonstrated something Napoleon valued deeply: decisive speed. In war, speed is not merely physical, it is psychological. It fractures the enemy's rhythm. It denies them the luxury of deliberation. It imposes momentum. Murat understood this not as doctrine, but as reflex. Napoleon later observed that courage is mastery over fear. Murat did not appear to master fear. He seemed to outrun it. There was something unnerving in the way he advanced. He did not look like a man surviving danger. He looked like a man expanding through it. During the Italian campaigns, Murat's cavalry became the sharpened edge of Napoleon's design. Infantry would fix the enemy in place. Artillery would break their cohesion. And then, at the precise second when doubt rippled through opposing ranks, Murat would strike. Cavalry is not about gradual conquest. It is about rupture. He charged as if the battle had already resolved in his favor. His appearance on the field became legend. Plumes, bright fabrics, gold embroidery gleaming against smoke and dust. To some it was vanity. To Murat it was strategy. Visibility was not exposure. It was dominance. If the enemy saw him at the front, unmistakable, unmistakably fearless, their morale shifted before blades ever crossed. He once declared, in words preserved by those who rode beside him, "A soldier's greatest weapon is not his blade, but the terror in the eyes of the man who sees him coming." Whether polished by memory or spoken plainly in camp, the sentiment was unmistakably his. Murat understood that war was collision of wills before it was collision of steel. At Castiglione, at Rivoli, again and again across Italy, he proved that audacity, when applied at the decisive instant, could unbalance entire armies. Not because cavalry was invulnerable, it was not, but because hesitation spreads faster than blood. When one flank collapses under shock, doubt infects the whole formation. Murat thrived in that thin interval between doubt and collapse. Yet even in these early triumphs, the shadow of consequence existed, faint but present. Recklessness and brilliance look identical when they succeed. Only time reveals which one stood at the helm. Napoleon valued Murat precisely because he did not hesitate. But Murat began to learn another lesson: proximity to power rewards spectacle. He married Napoleon's sister, Caroline. His ascent was no longer only martial, it became political. He was not merely a cavalry commander, he was becoming a figure, a symbol. And symbols are dangerous to inhabit. In these early years, his recklessness operated within structure, Napoleon's structure. Murat charged when ordered. He advanced within design. His brilliance had boundaries, and within those boundaries, it was devastating. But brilliance without restraint eventually strains against its frame. For now, that strain had not begun. For now, Murat was the perfect weapon, swift, fearless, and catastrophic at precisely the moment required. History would remember the spectacle, the plumes, the glittering coats, the thunder of hooves. But beneath the pageantry lay something far more formidable, an instinct that momentum seized at the exact second of enemy weakness can decide wars before they fully unfold. In these campaigns, Murat paid no price. He only accumulated power. And like many men who rise quickly through boldness, he began to believe, perhaps sincerely, that boldness itself was protection. Europe's great battlefields would soon test that belief, and they would not be merciful. There are battles that shape campaigns, and there are moments inside battles that shape empires. For Joachim Murat, those moments did not occur in quiet strategy rooms, nor in polished proclamations. They unfolded in the suspended seconds before impact, when thousands of men waited for someone to move first. And history often belongs to the one who moves. Austerlitz, 1805. The morning at Austerlitz was cold but deliberate. Napoleon had arranged weakness like a carefully set trap. The French right appeared vulnerable, thin, uncertain, inviting attack. The Allied forces saw opportunity and advanced. It was precisely what Napoleon wanted. But deception alone does not win a battle. Once the enemy commits, someone must exploit the opening. Someone must convert imbalance into collapse. Murat waited. Cavalry commanders perceive war differently than infantry. They do not measure territory in yards gained, but in momentum seized. They do not defend space. They disrupt cohesion. As the Allied center shifted and their lines extended, a fracture emerged. Not obvious at first, not dramatic, just a subtle thinning, a slight delay between orders and execution. Napoleon saw it. Murat felt it. The command came. The cavalry began forward at controlled pace. There is something terrible in the patience of mounted force. The ground trembles before the enemy understands why. Sound becomes vibration before it becomes thunder. Murat rode at the front, visible, unmistakable. Gold braids shimmered in winter light. His plume cut sharply through smoke. He did not conceal himself behind ranks of men. He declared himself. Some commanders cultivate authority through distance. Murat wielded it through proximity. As the French cavalry accelerated, the Allied formations attempted correction. Drums beat, Officers shouted, lines tried to wheel inward. But speed, once unleashed, compresses time. Orders dissolve in the roar of hooves. Adjustments falter. Fear spreads faster than command. Murat did not simply charge. He struck at the second of hesitation. Too early, and the enemy steadies. Too late, and resistance hardens. At Austerlitz, he struck when the line was still deciding whether it was vulnerable. Steel met formation. Formations fractured. The orderly advance of the Allied center unraveled into fragments of survival. It is tempting to describe this as spectacle, and it was spectacle. But beneath the glitter and thunder lay something more exacting. Shock, delivered at the precise moment of structural weakness, multiplies force beyond arithmetic. Murat understood this not academically, but instinctively. His brilliance was timing, and his legend expanded. But Austerlitz was brilliance inside architecture, Napoleon's architecture. Murat's aggression was framed, directed, restrained by a greater design. The storm that would define him came in snow. Eylau, 1807. If Austerlitz was orchestration, Eylau was disintegration. The battlefield lay beneath a violent blizzard. Snow swallowed sound. Smoke drifted low and disorienting. Visibility collapsed into flashes of artillery and shadows of men struggling to hold ground they could scarcely see. French infantry were faltering. Russian guns tore through formations with merciless precision. Entire ranks vanished into white chaos. For the first time in years, Napoleon's army seemed close, dangerously close, to unraveling. The center wavered. And when the center wavers, panic moves invisibly through men before it shows itself in retreat. Napoleon turned to Murat. There were no elegant maneuvers left, no feints, no strategic illusions, only force. Murat gathered nearly the entire cavalry reserve, thousands upon thousands of horsemen, and prepared to drive them directly into the Russian line. It was not subtle, it was survival. Before the charge, his words carried through the storm. Later, recollections preserved them in essence, if not in exact phrasing. Follow me. We will carve our road through them, or we will die beneath their guns. He did not promise victory, he promised forward motion. And then they moved. The charge at Eylau was not a wave, it was a succession of tidal surges. Cavalry disappearing into snow, swallowed entirely, only to re-emerge through Russian lines like steel tearing through cloth. Russian infantry attempted to form squares. Artillery blasted through advancing ranks, horses fell, riders were thrown. Yet momentum did not break. Murat passed entirely through Russian formations, through them, and then reformed beyond the smoke to charge again. This was not precision warfare. This was rupture imposed upon chaos. The charge did not win Eylau outright. It prevented catastrophe. That distinction is critical. Brilliance is not always conquest. Sometimes it is the refusal to collapse. At the height of the storm, Murat's reckless audacity stabilized an army on the brink of disintegration. His cavalry created confusion so vast that Russian formations lost cohesion. Time, precious, fragile time, was purchased in blood and velocity. Shock buys seconds. Seconds allow reorganization. Reorganization prevents defeat. That was Murat's gift. He could see seconds when seconds were the only resource left. But in the white fury of Eylau, another truth surfaced, quietly, dangerously. Such charges cannot be sustained forever. Reckless brilliance depends on proximity. Murat always rode at the front. He exposed himself to cannon, musket, blade. That kind of leadership electrifies soldiers. It transforms fear into momentum, but it also isolates a man. The more he embodied forward motion, the more he relied on boldness as universal solution. And boldness, when repeatedly rewarded, begins to feel invincible. At Borodino in 1812, he would again unleash cavalry into inferno, driving toward Russian redoubts with the same conviction: strike before the enemy can recover. But Russia was not Austria. Russia was not Prussia. Russia did not break easily. Snow absorbs sound, distance consumes momentum, and war, stretched across vast terrain, erodes even the fiercest charge. For now, however, Murat stood at the summit of his power. Europe had learned what followed when he moved. Enemy commanders adjusted their formations not merely to terrain, but to him. His presence altered calculations. He had become more than a general. He had become a force, and when a man begins to believe he is a force of nature, not a participant in strategy, but its embodiment, restraint weakens. That belief would follow him beyond battlefields. It would follow him to a throne, and thrones demand a different kind of discipline. Power alters a man's rhythm. On the battlefield, Murat's brilliance moved forward. It answered crisis with acceleration. It broke hesitation with impact. But a throne does not move. It waits. In 1808, Napoleon crowned Joachim Murat King of Naples. It was not merely reward, it was consolidation. Loyalty sealed by blood and title. Murat had married Caroline Bonaparte. He was no longer just a commander, he was family. And now he was sovereign. The transformation appeared seamless. The plumes remained. The gold braids grew heavier. Court ceremony replaced cavalry formations. Applause replaced cannon fire. Yet something subtle shifted. On the battlefield, Murat's recklessness operated within architecture, Napoleon's architecture. His charges were framed by a greater mind. He struck when design demanded rupture. In Naples, he was the design. And brilliance without structure begins to mistake itself for destiny. He governed with energy. He modernized elements of administration. He sought legitimacy not merely through intimidation, but through reform. He wanted to be more than Napoleon's cavalryman wearing a crown. He wanted to be necessary. But kingship requires patience, a discipline of restraint. It demands endurance without spectacle. Murat's genius had always required motion. Europe did not grant him stillness. The Peninsular War drained French strength. Austria repositioned. Prussia watched. And then Napoleon marched east into Russia, into immensity. In 1812, Murat rode again at the head of cavalry, a king in uniform plunging into the largest invasion Europe had ever seen. At Borodino, he drove his cavalry into Russian redoubts with familiar ferocity. Smoke consumed vision. Earthwork swallowed men whole. The battle was not elegant. It was attrition at monstrous scale. Murat rode at the front as always. His courage had not diminished, but courage cannot conquer geography. Russia did not shatter under shock. It absorbed it. It yielded ground instead of morale. It retreated into distance, stretching French supply lines across vast, indifferent terrain. Then winter arrived, and winter does not respond to boldness. The retreat from Moscow stripped illusion from every survivor. Horses collapsed mid-stride, men froze standing upright, discipline eroded into survival instinct. For the first time in his career, Murat commanded not momentum, but remnants. He attempted to preserve order. He tried to stabilize collapse. Yet reckless brilliance, so devastating in decisive moments, offered no solution to starvation, frost, and endless distance. You cannot charge the cold. You cannot intimidate exhaustion. For a man whose identity was forward motion, stagnation was erosion. By 1813, the illusion of French invincibility had fractured. The coalition advanced westward. Napoleon's empire contracted. Murat faced a choice that no battlefield had prepared him for: remain loyal to Napoleon and risk losing Naples, or preserve his crown by negotiating with former enemies. There were no drums for this decision, no formation to break, no moment of visible imbalance to exploit. Only consequence. Murat chose preservation. In 1814, he entered negotiations with Austria. He distanced himself from Napoleon. To some, it was betrayal. To him, it may have felt like adaptation. Survival repositioned as strategy. But battlefield instinct does not translate cleanly into diplomacy. Napoleon fell. Exiled to Elba, Europe rearranged itself at the Congress of Vienna. Thrones restored, alliances hardened. Murat's position grew fragile, suspended between distrust and memory. When Napoleon returned in 1815 during the 100 Days, Murat attempted one final surge of audacity. He declared support for Italian nationalism. He sought to rally forces. He believed momentum could be reignited through proclamation. It was a charge without cavalry, a final wager on boldness. Austrian forces defeated him swiftly. Naples slipped away. His allies vanished. Still, he refused stillness. Months later, in a desperate attempt to reclaim his throne, he landed in Calabria with only a handful of loyal followers, a king reduced to hope and memory. He was captured. On October 13, 1815, Joachim Murat stood before a firing squad. No battlefield, no trumpet, no thunder of hooves, just rifles leveled at his chest. Witnesses recorded that he refused a blindfold. He adjusted his coat. He faced his executioners. In his final moments, he spoke words that carried the essence of his life. "Soldiers, do your duty. Aim at my heart, spare my face." There was no plea, no attempt to retreat from visibility. Even at the end, he chose exposure. He died as he had lived, forward, unshielded, unwilling to turn away. Murat's life is not a simple arc of rise and fall. It is a study in alignment. Reckless brilliance, when harnessed by structure, becomes devastating power. In the hands of a larger design, Murat shattered armies and preserved empires. His instinct for timing, for striking at the exact second of imbalance, altered battles across Europe. But brilliance without discipline destabilizes itself. The instinct that wins war does not automatically govern peace. The audacity that inspires soldiers can alienate allies. The refusal to hesitate can become refusal to reflect. Murat was not undone by fear. He was undone by misapplied courage. He mistook motion for inevitability, and history is not governed by boldness alone. It rewards those who understand terrain, whether of battlefield or politics. Murat mastered one, he underestimated the other. His power lay in moving first. His price was learning that not every arena yields to speed. Some demand restraint, and restraint was never the language he spoke fluently.